Hi, my name is Matthew. This is video 20 of a series of videos on using the four strands and balancing a language course with the four strands. As this is the 20th video, you should watch the other 19 videos before watching this video, because I will be mentioning concepts and activities that are not explained here. So we're talking today about how we can get started learning a language if we're absolute beginners or if we're teaching absolute beginners. What do I mean by an absolute beginner? I mean somebody who doesn't know anything about the language that they're going to learn. That's not always true, though. There are a lot of international words, and often people know something about a language before they start learning it. Okay, in this video, I'll be referencing and mentioning some of these activities. In the previous 19 videos, I've shown this same chart again and again, and all these activities can be used with beginners. I'm going to show you and describe to you how that can be. Okay, so let's say that we are a language learner and we're learning a language on our own, no teacher. So we're learning a language from zero. That means that we need to start in either the language-focused learning strand or the meaning-focused input strand. So if you speak a language like Spanish and you're learning a language like Portuguese, you could probably start in the meaning-focused input strand and to make considerable progress because those languages have a lot of transparency. But if you are learning two very different languages like English and Chinese, for example, or Russian and Swahili, then the meaning-focused input strand is likely not going to help you too much unless it's very contextualized, something like Rosetta Stone. So it's probably better to start off with word cards and memorize sentences and dialogues. So find a survival vocabulary list, or if your course book that you have is really good, then start learning the words and memorize sentences and dialogues from that. You can go to Paul Nation's website and you can download some free survival vocabulary in a variety of languages, in a range of languages. And I mentioned that in the pair conversation and role plays video. So start learning that survival vocabulary and then start using that immediately in repeated practice with role plays and pair conversations or prepared talks with someone. So if you don't have a partner, then you need to practice speaking or practice imagining dialogues, going through the dialogues in your head that you would have using that survival vocabulary. So once you've memorized the list of 120 or so words, phrases, and sentences, you should start making use of those so that you're getting meaning-focused input by listening to somebody speaking to you, and you're getting meaning-focused output by using what you've learned and speaking. So at the same time, you'll have a course book or a textbook, and it will provide texts that have vocabulary for you to learn. So ideally, your course book, or it could be a book that you buy for your own learning, such as Teach Yourself. It will have dialogues, or it will have short text, and it will have audio. So make sure you have text with audio. You can start doing intensive reading. Of course, not overdoing it, because for every, let's say, let's go back to our big chart. So intensive reading is right here. For every 15 minutes of intensive reading you're doing, you need to balance that out with, like if this is 15 minutes, then that means the other ones in this strand are 45 minutes. So 1 hour is here, right? So you memorize sentences and dialogues. And then you need to also practice using what you've learned. So if you spend 15 minutes with intensive reading, all that time needs to be balanced out with all the other strands. So don't work too much with intensive reading. Once you've used a text or two and learned it to an extent, you can also use that text with repeated reading, for example, and repeated listening. So those intensive readings will give you a source for your word cards. So new vocabulary will start coming in after your survival vocabulary. So the text that you get in your language-focused learning will start becoming familiar, and then it will help you with fluency development. Once you have several hundred words, then you can start looking for graded readers or children's books and other ways of getting meaning-focused input. All right, so you are a teacher and you have a class of beginners and it's starting. What are you going to do? So, first of all, we're imagining a perfect situation where the school knows about language learning. The school is giving you the power to do what you want. The students aren't going to fight you with their preconceived notions of what language learning should be, especially beginners coming in telling the language teacher how how you're supposed to learn a language. So we're imagining a perfect situation where the teacher is able to do what she wants and no one's going to say, but why are you doing this? All right, so what does the teacher do? The teacher has absolute power. The teacher is a good source of input for the students, right? So the teacher can find very simple stories. So once the students have learned about 100 words, very simple stories can be told to the students using that vocabulary. And there are blown up books, as in large books that have pictures, and the teacher tells the students stories in each class. It doesn't need to take that much time, it could just be a few minutes. And that's an enjoyable listening activity, and the teacher can provide that too. The teacher needs to train the students for how to use word cards and memorize sentences and dialogues, and to learn the most essential words first, like the survival vocabulary list. That's probably the most important to cover first. Students need to practice using word cards in the classroom because usually people do it wrong unless they get some kind of feedback and practice with doing it. So they start in class doing that activity and then they get familiar with it. The teacher is also a good source of meaning-focused input. We shouldn't forget that. So the teacher should be good at giving plenty of listening input to the students that's at the right level. The teacher should think more about planning rather than teaching. So the teacher's job is to plan for learning in the four strands. So we've already talked about the teacher starting and training the students with word cards and memorized sentences and dialogues. Once students are confident or they're a good way into learning some sentences and dialogues, the teacher can use substitution tables to help the students with language-focused learning with speaking. So this memorize sentences and dialogues, you can also add substitution tables there with speaking. This is a substitution table. So the teacher writes this on the board and the teacher points to the words. So it works like this. I don't want to go to the park tomorrow. Do you want to go to the mall this afternoon? You don't want to go to the supermarket tomorrow. Yeah, so you choose one from each box and you keep going. So the teacher can point to the words and the students repeat. Of course, this is not going to go down well in some teaching circles because they're are some teaching circles that, or teacher training programs that encourage teachers not to point at the board and have students speak or read from the board. But this is a traditional way of using a substitution table, and it is very useful actually. Nowadays, most substitution tables are just in the reference part of a book, and they're not used for speaking practice. Students can also look at the substitution table and they can write out 4 sentences maybe. So you can say use after they practice a bit, then they write out 4 sentences. So teacher has gotten the students to use word cards and they're training to use the word cards. Students have gotten some practice with substitution tables. Let's say the teacher is having students practice with substitution tables to prepare the students for meaning-focused output. So preparing the students for the pair work and role plays. So whatever conversation or dialogue the students will have that day, the teacher will run those sentences through the substitution table for the students to set them up for success with that. And of course, the teacher is keeping track of how many times they've done their role plays and pair conversations. And in the role plays and pair conversations video, I showed you a table of topics and how to keep track of that, making sure that you're repeating each session 5 times, each topic 5 times. So the course book will also have intensive reading or intensive listening. So those can also be used for word cards. And yeah, so reviewing those texts will also help with fluency development. And once students have covered several hundred words, they can start using graded readers. They'll need to use graded readers in class or extensive reading in class before some of it is assigned for homework. Otherwise, students are not likely to do it. So rather than balancing all of this within 1 week's worth of time, it's probably better to balance these 4 strands across 2 weeks of a course. A teacher implementing the 4 strands is actually, they will see much more progress with the students learning than if they spent all the time in language-focused learning. So a real danger is that teachers will teach too much. The number one job should be to plan, not teach. So most of the time needs to be spent with planning these other strands. The teacher is really good though for language-focused learning as an explicit teaching, but that's not what's going to build an implicit system like a mental representation of language in the mind. So it's not going to help students with any of their skills really. So students really need to be engaged with the language in the 3 message-focused strands. So teachers, make sure you plan for learning.